So I would like to ask Speaker Steele, why should we support this legislation?
Sure. Let me say, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this discussion, and thank you to everyone who's here tonight to learn more about this ballot initiative. I would start with the premise that as we have the discussion here tonight, our state prisons are at 112% capacity. We are under a federal lawsuit for prison overcrowdingness, and we've increased our appropriation to the Department of Corrections by 172% in the last 2 decades. The reality is we are incarcerating more people than we ever have in the history of our state and spending more on incarceration than we ever have. And yet we're not seeing any real positive return on investment in the way of reducing crime or increasing public safety. And it's because we fail to address the root causes behind the criminogenic behavior, behind the antisocial behavior. The reality is we should be addressing addiction and mental illness through appropriate levels of treatment and rehabilitation within the community, not through extended periods of incarceration. With our prison situation the way it is right now, we are simply doing nothing more than warehousing individuals. We're not providing proper levels of treatment to deal with the core issues. And so we've done our homework, we've studied what has been successful in other states from a policy perspective, and we've made a determination to sort of bypass the political gridlock that has led to Oklahoma having the highest incarceration rates in the country. I think if you're here tonight, you're probably aware that Oklahoma has the highest female incarceration rates of any state in the nation, the second highest male incarceration rates, and just recently the U.S. Sentencing Commission released a report that indicates that we incarcerate African Americans at the highest percentage per capita as well. And so what we're saying is this: if the issue that's at play is addiction or mental illness, we can make better use, more effective use of our state's resources by investing in treatment and mental health care at the community level rather than continue to incarcerate people and never address the root causes behind the antisocial behavior.
District Attorney Mashburn, as he has indicated, Oklahoma is sort of the national poster child of locking people up. And it's been going on for quite a while with what some say are some of the most severe sentencing laws in the nation. Why would you oppose these questions?
Simply put, because of the immense danger to public safety. If this passes, our most dangerous drugs become misdemeanors: possession of those drugs, possession of methamphetamine, possession of heroin, possession of cocaine. All of those drugs become misdemeanors the first time you do it, the 5th time you do it, the 100th time you do it. These drugs are ravaging our state, and to reduce the consequences for offenders who will not change no matter what opportunities they are given to get into treatment, it doesn't make sense. And so I don't want to be part of a state who chooses to ignore someone who repeatedly offends and continues to break into cars and break into homes and pawn property. Those things are all part of this problem. And if we're going to just make all of those crimes misdemeanors and just say we're going to give you a few months in county, slap you on the hand, put you right back on the street so you can continue to do this to innocent victims, the cost of public safety is not worth the risk. There are things that we can do, and there are smart ways to go about it, but this isn't it.
Speaker, what's your response to the question of whether public safety would be endangered?
I truly believe that we will see a reduction in crime and increase in public safety by addressing the root cause behind the antisocial behavior. The reality is this: when we can begin to appropriately address addiction and help individuals get connect with the treatment they need, fewer crimes will be committed. We've seen this dynamic occur in many other states that have already implemented a variation of these reforms, and there's no reason to believe that it wouldn't happen here in Oklahoma as well. The reality is we never address what's causing the behavior. We only address the symptoms, and these reforms give us an opportunity to get at the core issue, which is addiction and or mental illness for these low-level crimes. And so when we can properly invest in treatment and mental health care in the community, we will see a reduction in crime. It's happened in virtually every state that's already enacted a variation of these reforms.
Speaker, there are many district attorneys, police officers, sheriffs who are very skeptical or who oppose these measures. What do you say? Why do you think they're taking these stances?
Well, first of all, I will let them speak for themselves. I have tremendous respect for our prosecutors. I have tremendous respect for our law enforcement officers. I pray for them. I thank God for the job that they do. They do a great job. But the reality is this: I have yet to talk to a district attorney or a law enforcement officer who says that our current system is working, that our current system isn't broken and in need of repair. And so ultimately, we have to come to a point where we say, okay, what we're doing is not working, and it makes absolutely no sense to continue to throw money at a broken system. We're going to have to enact policies that give us a chance to actually chart a better course, take a smarter approach to public safety, and ensure that we have the space and resources available in our prison systems for individuals who truly pose a danger to society or a threat to public safety. The reality is, with our prisons at 112% capacity, there's really no room for individuals who probably should be incarcerated. So we have to make sure that we're making good use, and in this particular point in time, the best use of our state's resources, and it's not to continue to incarcerate low-level offenders.
District Attorney, just by the same token, there are a number of groups, conservative, left-leaning, who support these proposals. Both Tulsa and Oklahoma City Chambers of Commerce, Clay Bennett, Tom Ward, Larry Nichols, Mental Health Association, Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs Impact. That's not persuasive?
Oh, absolutely not, because I don't see those people in my courtroom every day. I don't see them dealing with what the parts of society that I have to walk in and see every day in the courtroom. I wish they would come down and see it. I wish they would try to be there when I'm trying to get a person to go into treatment, and I'm saying, please, go into drug court instead of taking 5 or 10 years in prison. And they go, no, give me my prison sentence. I don't want treatment. So I wish they would be a part of this and be in the trenches with those sheriffs and those police departments that are seeing this every day and dealing with these people time and time and time again, and dealing with the person who, after 5 times, we finally said, look, I'm tired of you stealing. I'm tired of you taking your drugs and being out on the streets. I have to put you somewhere where you can't hurt anybody, at least for a little while. And if those people would come and see that, I think they would have a very different opinion and see the harm that it causes to our families when you're talking about meth addicts who neglect their children and are in favor of the drugs, and the pain it causes and the cycle that it just continues to churn. I think if they saw that, it would make a huge impression.
But do you think if they're coming back repeatedly after charges of possession, that that's a sign that they just aren't getting the treatment, that they're not getting the cure from the system? It's just a revolving door of incarceration. Why continue that cycle?
Exactly. So we offer it to them and we say, go do it. And we put people into treatment centers and they walk away. And then we say, here's a bed. I don't want that bed. Give me my jail time so I can get back out and smoke meth. So yeah, there are people, we can't hand feed them this stuff. We can make it available to them. At some point in time, it's on them to stop what they're doing and take advantage of the resources that are out there. And there's not enough. We need more of those resources. But sometimes people just refuse to change, and I have to get them off the street to protect everybody else from them.
Speaker, we had legislation passed earlier this year that did make some reductions in penalties, minimum mandatory, I think, for possession, and some other changes that everyone was praising, perhaps you as well. Why that's not sufficient? We have to take it a step further?
Sure, and I want to answer that question, but I also just want to agree with something that Mr. Mashburn said. We do need bigger investments in treatment and rehabilitation programs in the state of Oklahoma, and that's exactly what State Question 780 and 781 provide. But in reference to the legislation that was passed this past session, those were steps in the right direction. As a matter of fact, one of the provisions actually raises the general property crimes from $500 to $1,000 to encompass the felony threshold. What 780 does in relation to that is there are property crimes scattered throughout Oklahoma statutes, meaning that if you steal something related to fish or gaming, it's in a different section of the law. So this brings that section up to the $1,000 threshold. Crimes related to oil and gas, it brings those up. Hot checks, it brings those up to the $1,000 threshold, which most states have already accomplished. The other thing I would say is that even though, and I think it's a move, and I did support it, a move in the right direction to reduce the mandatory minimums or sentences structure for drug offenses, the fact remains that they continue to be felony charges. And the reality is when we tag a person as a convicted felon, that designation acts as a scarlet letter that stays with that person for life, and it closes the door on most employment opportunities, it closes the door on most education opportunities, and even stable housing opportunities. The statistics indicate that 1 in 12 Oklahomans are currently convicted felons. That's too many. When we assign a person as a convicted felon, that designation basically charts that person's course of life forever, and we need to think long and hard about who should be a convicted felon. There certainly are people who are dangerous and commit violent crimes, and that designation would be appropriate, but it's not for these low-level offenses. And so that's a significant change in these reforms and what the legislature did. The other thing I would say is that the legislature passed a law that gave district attorneys more discretion to file as misdemeanors non-85% crimes. And again, that sounds really good, but the reality is prosecutors have always had the discretion to determine what charges to file against an individual, so I don't really know that that accomplishes much. These reforms ultimately take us to the next level in sentencing reform and making sure that low-level offenses are classified appropriately and that people who battle addiction and mental illness get the help that they need.
District Attorney, these measures do seem to take some discretion out of the hands of prosecutors and counties, and I'd like what your reaction is to that, but also to follow up with the speaker's point, district attorneys have had that discretion for a long time, and yet our prisons are overcrowded. Many people have felonies. It hasn't seemed to have worked in terms of reducing the sense that we have to imprison a lot of people. What's your response? Yeah,
so let me unravel that here for just a second. First of all, it's not, everybody please understand, when you get arrested for your first felony, no one's getting a felony conviction unless it's really, really bad, or you have a rap sheet a mile long for other stuff that you've done in municipal court, or there's way more to the story. So the police department just doesn't show up at the doorstep and arrest you and say, you're a convicted felon now. You're offered probation time and time again. You're offered community sentencing. You're offered drug court. You're offered a myriad of opportunities to please stop committing crime. And they don't take advantage of it, and then they're forced, the system is forced to then tag them as a convicted felon. It's not just let's go and make somebody a convicted felon. They have made a series of choices that lead to that. Now, as far as our discretion, it impacts our discretion, but it takes tools away from our tool belt. So drug courts will cease to exist. I mean, let's just be honest. If someone now is facing a long-term prison sentence and I have to talk them into doing a 2-year drug court program over a 5 or 10-year prison sentence, if I'm telling them, look, just do 2 years of drug court or do a few months in county jail, every one of them are going to take county jail. Give me county jail. Give me county jail. These aren't going to be enhanceable crimes, so the next time's not a felony, so they can just represent themselves. So they show up, they tell the judge, yep, I want that deal. Give me some county time. I can be back out on the street in a few months. and they're going to choose. They're going to make these choices just to be right back out on the street, continue to do the deal. I won't have a choice. I'll have to just give them their county time, put them right back out on the street, and at some point in time, they're going to hurt somebody. They're going to steal from somebody. They're going to do things to other members of society, and I'm going to have to tell that victim, I am so sorry that we couldn't stop this guy on his 5th or 6th time because it's a misdemeanor every time, and I've given him county jail time these 10 times, and now I'm sorry that he's hurt you. It's unacceptable. I do not want to have those conversations with victims.
Speaker, what are your thoughts on that?
So the reality is this: misdemeanor drug courts have been in existence in Oklahoma statute since 2008. The legislature created misdemeanor drug courts as a way to deal with addiction early on in 2008, and yet not a single misdemeanor drug court is operational in the state of Oklahoma because they've never been funded. If 780 and 781 pass, counties then will immediately have funding to establish and operate misdemeanor drug courts. And the research, not the emotion, but the research is very clear that swift, certain, and sure sanctions, as contained in the misdemeanor drug court and the felony drug court model, are much more effective in modifying behavior of people who battle addiction and mental illness than extended periods of incarceration. So we actually have an opportunity to base the policies and the laws on the research, on data, and not on emotion or fear. Again, what we're doing right now is not working. If it were working, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So we have to consider what is a better approach, what is a evidence-based approach that would allow us to actually address the root cause of the problems at a point in time that's actually going to make a lasting difference. And that's what these reforms allow us to do.
Well, one of the concerns is that if you take away the felony conviction, you remove the threat of punishment, and they won't have the motive to complete drug court or enter drug court. What do you say?
So when I say swift, certain, and sure sanctions, and also let me couple that with a graduated sanction model, what it means is this: for a person who is court-ordered to treatment and they refuse to work that treatment, then the courts would have the opportunity to sanction that person to, say, a weekend in jail, or perhaps every weekend for a month in jail. Could be a week in jail, it could be 2 weeks in jail, but it's a short and swift and certain period of time that gets the individual's attention without disrupting any stability that they may have in their life. So they are able to continue to work a treatment plan. They're able to continue to remain employed. If they need a timeout, they're given a timeout. And each one of these offenses carry with it up to a year in jail that allow for this swift, certain, and sure graduated sanction model to occur. That model, coupled with effective treatment, that form of sanctions coupled with effective treatment, is proven, according to the research, the meta-analysis, which is the conclusion of all the research projects, as being much more effective than simply warehousing an individual for extended periods of time. And so this gives us an opportunity to move to a model that actually has some science behind it in reducing crime and increasing public safety.
District Attorney, you mentioned that there are perhaps other approaches we could take instead of this one. Any ideas on what we should do to address this question of over-incarceration, as some say, and if you would agree it is excessive incarceration, and many people having felonies that pretty much forever limit their opportunities in life?
Yeah, so what was the question?
The question is, do you have any, what are your ideas? You said that there are other approaches.
So first of all, let's talk about over-incarceration. I mean, you can't expect, in the state of Oklahoma, you cannot expect us to be number one in domestic abuse and teen pregnancy, and I mean, top 5 in poverty and all of the social ills that our state faces, and not have some sort of symptom of a lot of people end up in prison because they're committing crimes. Right? I mean, they're not going to prison, and we're saying that they never did any crimes against society. They did those things to end up there. So we first of all, we need to figure out what in our state leads to them making these poor decisions. What leads to the drug use? Is it the family dynamic? I mean, Kris knows. Family dynamics, or was it domestic abuse, drugs in the home? I mean, what things are they experiencing growing up that cause our population to continue this behavior in the next cycle and wind up in prison. Let's figure that out. Let's dig into that greater societal issue. Number two, let's fund some of the stuff Kris Steele did when he was in the legislature, that the DAs as an association signed off on, and let's do some intermediate revocation facilities. Let's do some of these other things. Let's fund that stuff. Let's give a chance for this latest round of justice reform that just passed the legislature, comes into effect November 1st. Let's give that stuff a chance to work and see how that goes. Let's be a part of the governor's criminal justice task force that's going on right now. Let's all sit down at the table, look at our population. Let's look at the numbers and see who's in there, why they're in there, how long they're serving, what other things could we have done on times 1, 2, and 3 that we didn't do, and they did 4, 5, and 6 crimes, and we had no choice to protect society to put them in there. So there's tons of stuff that we could do. Maybe we could do some reformatories where we get them out of our communities for a little while, and we put them in some kind of treatment center that's at least maybe not a prison, but a place where they can get treatment and go to work during the day. I do want to also say, so there's some great things that we can do, and we can work together in doing that, so let's do it. Let's not just decide that we're going to ignore all of the crimes that they're committing by making them misdemeanors and fill up our county jails and have no way to pay for it down the road. These swift and sure sanctions that Mr. Steele talks about, that happens now. If someone's not compliant with their probation, we pull them in and we give them a weekend. We pull them in and give them, and we used to have a nighttime program in Oklahoma County we used all the time. So those things happen now, and it doesn't work. That's what I'm sitting here trying to tell you, 18 years of doing this. Those things are not enough of a deterrent to get the person to change their lifestyle and stop committing crimes.
Thank you. Let's open it up to the audience. Emily, over here, and Evie, does anyone have a question? Okay.
Hi, thank you so much for having this conversation with us tonight. I'm not very familiar with the drug court, so I had a quick question for you, Mr. Mashburn. Whenever they go through drug court, they do it voluntarily. Do they have the option to not have a felony attached to them after they complete drug court?
Sure do. They get their case dismissed totally. So the case, it doesn't even show up on the record, it gets dismissed.
Okay, so since that's already in effect, what would this do different to change their behavior and encourage something else for you?
Sure.
Thank you.
So ultimately what this does, and drug court's a great program. I'm a big fan of drug court, and I'm saying that these reforms give us an opportunity to enhance, expand, and actually incorporate a misdemeanor drug court variation of the program to help people who need the help sooner rather than later without having the fear of being tagged as a convicted felon for life. And so counties will have the opportunity, the discretion to determine how to and what treatment programs to enhance, to better fund and to expand. If there's a concern about drug court, I would tell you it's become a rich man's game, and I don't know what the cost is in Cleveland County. Mr. Mashburn could speak to that, but I'm very familiar with the cost in Oklahoma County, and it's running on average about $240 a month to participate in drug court in Oklahoma County. The participant has to pay for all of their drug treatment, all of their drug testing, all of their supervision, fees and fines associated with the program as well. And it's a great program if you can afford to go through it. But there's a lot of people who simply can't afford those costs. And so what these reforms do is allow us to perhaps incorporate some sort of means test to know what a person can afford, and then supplement the treatment so that cost is not a barrier to participating in drug courts across the state of Oklahoma. This gives more opportunity for more people to get the help that they need sooner rather than later. And the final thing I would say about drug court is that it's rare that a person is assigned to drug court for simple possession. Usually they're assigned to drug court because they've committed, they're so deep in their addiction that's led to antisocial behavior, and it's caused them to create some sort of felony conviction that's either a choice of going to prison or finally getting the treatment they need. It's too late. They need to be able to get the treatment at the onset, at the first signs of addiction, not when they're deep in their addiction.
Take another question right here.
Okay, Thank you. My name is Pat Galloway, and I've just written a book called Incarceration, A Family Crisis. And as Speaker Steele just said, if Oklahoma's the poster state, my family was the poster family. And of my 6 children, 4 of my sons were incarcerated in their lifetime, and my oldest son died in prison. And so I started out in an advocacy. I realized years ago that people in prison and people facing prison need an advocate. But I liked one of the things that the district attorney said, because my son actually participated, one of my sons, in that nighttime program. And he also was, 2 of my sons actually suffered from mental illnesses, documented mental illnesses. And when he went into that 90-night program, I went down to his public defender and took letters showing his mental condition and said, please, what are you going to do? And she said, oh, it's just going to be 90 nights, no big deal, And I said, well, what if he can't do that? You have to be there at 6 o'clock at night, stay all night, leave at 6 o'clock in the morning. And he lasted about 2 weeks. But I asked her, I said, well, what's going to happen when he can't do the 90-night deal? And she said, well, he'll have 10 years to serve. So he went off and toured the country and
you're
came
wondering
back
what
after-
mental health treatment they would receive under this change?
No, they wouldn't mention his mental health deal at all. That she said if it were murder or rape, oh, he tried to steal a pair of combat boots from an Army surplus store. He didn't even get out with the boots.
Well, so what would your question be for the
My
panel?
question is, I want to address the nighttime incarceration thing.
Okay.
And also that with Speaker Steele,
Okay.
my kids never had the advantage of drug court.
I guess the question.
And so
Thank you.
my question is not only what are we going to do with, I see what we're going to do with these first and second time offenders, but what about those offenders who are serving long, long sentences? My son ended up getting the 10-year sentence.
Thank you. Well,
And
let
it
them
cost
answer
Oklahoma $90,000 to keep him locked up.
Well,
6 years.
Thank you.
So the reality is this: these reforms apply only to low-level offenses of simple possession and property crimes under $1,000. They're statutory changes. They can be amended. The things that Mr. Mashburn alluded to that he would like to see occur, the governor's, the suggestions from the governor's Justice Reform Task Force, that can absolutely occur in conjunction with the passage of State Question 780 and 781. Funding reforms that have previously been passed by the state legislature can also occur. These reforms, I think, complement and enhance some other initiatives that are already underway. But Ms. Galloway, to answer your question, these reforms only apply to the offenses of simple possession and low-level property crimes.
Is there another question over here?
Yes, good evening. District Attorney Mashburn, I have a question. You said that in the trenches of where you're living or where you're working, you see people who are, recidivism is very high. I'm a psychotherapist. I work with substance abuse clients as well as mental health. I'm in the trenches as well, and in those trenches I see people improving. I guess one concern I have is that with one swipe, everyone is thrown into one bucket or the other. Don't we care about the persons who can improve, who can be helped by substance abuse treatment? Because I see progress.
Right, absolutely. So you're seeing progress with people, and there's certainly people that's taking advantage of it now. But if they choose not to, if they want to keep doing and living the life that they're doing and continue to make victims out of people, then we have to put them somewhere else. And so let's continue to improve our treatment options. One of the things that we just did with this past legislation is before it was only the people who were prison bound could go to drug court, and no one gets by the way, no one ever gets turned away from drug court because they can't afford it. Drug court, when this legislation makes it so that people are eligible for drug court even though they may not be prison bound. So it allows us to give people that option on times 1, 2, and 3, where before, unless you were prison bound, you couldn't even get into the program. So we're making progress in that way.
Speaker, I'd like to ask us quickly about the money. Well, the ambitions of the measures. I mean, you've said before that you could see as much as 30% reduction in admissions. Do you think you can achieve that goal with these questions?
I do. The reality is that we just recently were presented some data that indicated that 56% of admissions to the Department of Corrections last year were for simple possession charges, and 81% of that number had 0 to 1 prior convictions. So we can see a reduction in any given year as far back as we can see, and we're looking at a 10-year average. About 25 to 30% of DOC admissions would fall into the categories contained in State Question 780, 781. When you consider it costs $19,000 a year to incarcerate a person versus $6,000 a year to provide treatment and mental health care supervision in the community, we can and will see a tremendous reduction in savings. The reality is we're already spending this money, but we're spending it to warehouse individuals within the penal system instead of addressing the root cause of addiction and mental health in the community. So we strongly believe, and it's a conservative estimate, that we could see a reduction, a 25% reduction of admissions to the Department of Corrections moving forward in every year. The savings would be calculated by the Department of Management and Enterprise Services, redirected back to counties then to invest in treatment, mental health care, job training to help individuals receive the help they need, turn their lives around, and become productive members of our community.
Thank you. Question in the back.
Well, it sort of answers my question about how much would save, but Mr. Mashburn and also Mr. Steele, I mean, besides the savings, I mean, what is the auxiliary savings of not breaking up families and not putting people in jail for mental health and addiction issues that might have, downstream effects could be?
So, great question, and let me just throw a couple of more statistics at you. And the reason I'm being so heavy on the statistics is I think it's important that we base our decision on the data and not on anecdotes. Oklahoma leads the nation in the number of grandparents raising grandchildren. We're number 1 in the nation in the number of grandparents raising grandchildren. It's directly related to the issue of incarceration, female incarceration. When you look at the number of kiddos in foster care and how that number continues to swell, I would also submit that it's directly related to the issue of incarceration, mass incarceration in Oklahoma. To answer your question, it costs $19,000 a year to incarcerate the parent. It costs $20,000 a year, $20,000 to $24,000 a year in Oklahoma to provide services for kiddos who are in state custody. When you consider that most female offenders are moms, the primary caregiver of 2 to 3 children, and it costs about $20,000 a year for each of those kiddos who may be in state custody while the mom is incarcerated, the numbers begin to add up pretty quickly.
District Attorney, your thoughts on these costs and whether they're achievable?
Yeah, but you also have to look at the other side of it. So if we leave the kid in the home with mom who has the kid walk out the bag of marijuana to the car and take the money and walk it back in while we're in their diaper, I mean, what's the cost of that kid? Because we're headed to we're going to have to incarcerate that kid on down the line. Or I can send the mom to prison and I can take the kid and either get him raised by the grandparents, or we can put him we can get him into a better environment than what he's currently sitting in and hopefully have a chance for success on down the road. I mean, so there's a flip side to that. You can't just look at it as, well, we just ignore what the parents are doing to their kids while they're doing all the drugs around them and act like there's no cost to that as well. So absolutely, there's ways to look at it, and I want you to know that your district attorneys in the state of Oklahoma take that into consideration every single day. Is this someone that needs to be away from their family? Is this someone that the kids are going to be in a better situation because this parent's not going to be around to harm them anymore or show them how to do the drugs anymore? So, yeah, we're going to take that into consideration every time we say every case has a face, and we're going to look at that deal and make sure that we're doing the right thing every time. This is not something where we just walk in a courtroom and we're just going to sign up as many people as we can to get them in to see how many people we can get to pull chain that day to DOC. We are very thoughtful about that.
Thank you.
So let me just respond.
Just one question. I'm sorry.
Can I respond very quickly? I kind of want to validate what Mr. Mashburn is saying. These are not easy choices, and I truly believe that in some cases, district attorneys who have to impose a consequence for breaking the law are left with the only consequence being incarceration. And if that's the case because appropriate diversion or treatment programs do not exist in a particular location, that's not good. That's why we're suggesting that we move towards State Question 780 and 781. And just to tell you, statistically, and this comes from a U.S. Department of Justice study conducted for Big Brothers Big Sisters to try to determine the impact of incarceration on children, they actually released a report that indicated that children of incarcerated parents are 7 times more likely to become incarcerated at some point in their life than their peers. It becomes a generational cycle, and I don't even know how you measure the cost on that.
Thank you.
It's very impactful.
We have a question over here.
Hi, I just want to go back to something that you previously said. It seems to me that people are choosing a felony not more over being able to do drugs, but more over not being able to pay the cost for a drug court. And you said that if they can't afford it, that doesn't keep them from being able to do it. So what happens if they can't afford it? Because usually the people that you're referring to don't have jobs. And so what happens if they can't afford it? Do they then get a prison sentence? And the money that goes to drug court, where does that go? What does that go to currently?
Yeah, so Department of Mental Health provides grants to district attorneys' offices to run drug courts. And so that's where the money comes from for these programs. So if I get a person in, they don't have jobs currently, but part of the process of drug court is go get a job and we'll help you find a job. So drug court works with those people. They have different people, like in Norman, Sonics and different places in town hire a lot of the drug court participants, so they have a lot of places to employ them with. And so the cost comes from, it's like $5 for a pea cup, to do your drug test or whatever. So those costs are so they go to work, they have income, they will have to spend some of that income on their drug tests and some sort of their treatment. But if they don't have it, if they lost their job or they're not making enough to cover those costs, it's very routine for a judge to waive those. And at the end, I believe it's part of some laws that we passed that all their fines and costs get waived in the criminal case. Don't hold me to that. I just know that that's something that was discussed. But we're not going to set people up to fail. We're not going to load them down with a bunch of costs and say, here's your bill for drug court is $2,000 or whatever. We're going to work with them. We're going to make sure that they're successfully employed and that they have the ability to pay. And if they don't, they get waived. The drug tests end up getting paid out of the drug court money that's there. And we also have community partners that help out with rewards for people that give them like food vouchers and stuff like that to help them continue to be successful in the program.
Other questions? Well, I have one question for the speaker. There have been some opinion pieces lately about what's happening in California. Proposition 47, passed in 2014. A recent one in the Wall Street Journal saying property crime has surged. There are more homeless people, even repeat offenders, released after a few days. And that maybe this measure, which did make some similar reductions to misdemeanors for non-serious, non-violent crimes, maybe it's not saving that money. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it raises this question: is how confident are you that this program is going to work and it's going to save us money?
So I am confident. I am not extremely familiar with California's reforms, but I do know this about what happened in the state of California. They were also under a federal lawsuit, a federal decree, and their reforms, when they enacted them, applied to everyone who was currently in prison. So it was like a massive exodus within the prison system of individuals back into the community who battled addiction or mental illness, and they did not have the infrastructure in place to properly address those issues. I can tell you what Oklahoma, what 780 and 781 is doing. These reforms are completely prospective. They are not retroactive. They do not apply to anyone who has been sentenced under the current law. So that doesn't apply to anyone who's currently in prison. It's a pay-as-you-go system, meaning that moving forward, as people are convicted of these crimes, we will calculate the savings, give the savings back to the county so that they can then invest in the treatment to make sure that it's there, that it's adequate, that it's in place. And so I think it's a much more responsible approach based on what little I know about what happened in California.
Question back there.
I see Chief City here from the city of Oklahoma City. He might end up having a question possibly. But I wondered, I hear that the sheriffs and the DAs have a lot of flexibility that they don't necessarily use because they want to appear tough on crime. Could you address that as a possibility on what they could do but maybe they're not doing right now to help with the problem?
Which one's that for?
District Attorney.
Okay. I'm not sure what you're talking about. So I know that DAs use prison as a last resort. So we work every program that we have available to us. We work people into community sensing. My community sensing since I've been DA has grown immensely. My drug court, we move up a tier almost every other year because we're putting so many people into it. My Anna McBride, which is our mental health court, it has grown. I mean, so we're using every tool we have. Is it enough? Obviously not. So what can we do on times 1, 2, and 3 to alter behavior? Because that's what we're really talking about. We've got to catch these people earlier in the system and do something with them. And so all I can tell you is every case we have, we do that. We try to formulate a sentence that will get them to stop and offer what's available out there to get them to do that. And sometimes it works, and a lot of times it doesn't.
So I will not speak for district attorneys or sheriffs. I think that's the categories that you ask about as far as the political incentive to be tough on crime. But I will tell you unequivocally that dynamic exists within the state legislature. For years, the political incentive has been to be perceived as quote-unquote tough on crime. And the way that tough on crime was measured was through long periods of incarceration. I mean, that's just how you proved if you were tough on crime. I've lived that dynamic. I've experienced that dynamic, and it's real. It exists. We're at a point in time now where the conversation's beginning to change. We're realizing now that we can be just as tough for those who pose a legitimate danger or a threat to public safety, but twice as smart for low-level offenses if we'll just apply the research and the facts and the data to our policy making. That's why we're having the discussion that we're having. So at the end of the day, 780 and 781 are about this question. Should people who battle addiction and mental illness be incarcerated? Or should they have access to treatment to deal with those issues in the community? That's the question. I don't think, I'll tell you this unashamedly, I don't think that just because a person battles addiction or mental illness that they're a bad person. I think they need help. And I think that we have limited resources in our state, so the question then becomes, do we want to spend our resources on incarceration, or would we rather spend our resources on treatment and mental health care in the community? I think this is a win for people who battle addiction and mental illness, and I think it's also a win for the taxpayers of Oklahoma.
Other questions? There's one up here.
For District Attorney Mashburn, what are the other things that you can do or you need to be able to do on times 1, 2, and 3 to get them to change behavior?
I'm in a great place in Cleveland County in Norman because we have access to a lot more treatment than some of our rural areas in the state. So let me start speaking for the rural DAs, they need more options out away from the metro areas. They may not have treatment providers that are with, I mean, you talk to Mike Boring up in the Panhandle, if he's going to send somebody to treatment, sometimes that's going to be 4 or 5 hours away to us downstaters, as the Panhandle people like to say. He's got to send them downstate to do anything with them. So we've got to find a way to get access to those people better. So in my district, I don't know what else we could, when we're setting them up and saying, go do these things. We have drug evaluations. You know, we send them and say, go over there and get a drug evaluation, follow whatever it recommends for you to do. It depends on self-reporting a lot of the time. So they say, no, I don't have a problem. I don't know what you're talking about. You know, then the evaluator has to kind of judge that to see. So maybe if there's some better tools that can be used to really identify what their issues are. And I'm not talking about a 15-question questionnaire that they get to answer and then you know, we have to depend on. But those take time, so they need to go interview the friends, maybe interview the family members, and kind of really dig down into what the issues are. A lot of times that can be done with a good defense counsel. There's a lot of great defense attorneys out there that when they get a person, they bring them in and they give them the come to Jesus speech and they say, what is your problem? And let's dig in and let's figure it out. And then they come into the DA's office and he goes, here's what my guys got. And here's some options. And we can sit down and we can have that negotiation back and forth to really figure out what the best solution is. So we need more frank conversations like that in our courthouses as well.
So may I respond just super quickly? I'll be very quick. Thank you for the question. Mr. Mashburn said what we need is access to more options, diversion programs. We need access to more treatment. That's what 780 and 781 do. I want to say very quickly that we've talked to sheriffs across the state of Oklahoma who've made it very clear that their jails have become the largest mental health provider in their entire county. The problem is jails are not equipped or designed or funded to provide adequate mental health care. So we've got to make sure that we have a mental health and substance abuse infrastructure in place in counties throughout Oklahoma so that we can get people to the appropriate levels of treatment, and it's not incarceration.
Is anyone who has not asked a question yet? Right here. Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Mark Nelson with the Oklahoma City Fraternal Order of Police and the Oklahoma Fraternal Order of Police. I would argue that other than victims of these crimes or these illnesses, that no one is more exposed to the ills of drug addiction and mental illness in our society than law enforcement. We live it every single day. And while we can admit that there probably are some changes that need to be made, it doesn't automatically mean that the first one to stand up and offer a solution makes that solution the right one. It's my understanding with this change, if it passes, that receiving, concealing stolen property, that crime will now have a threshold of $1,000. And I've spoken with many of our gang officers here locally who see this daily with young men who are in that in-between stage of their life on what to do next, and they're pulled over on traffic or they're encountered by law enforcement and they have a stolen gun. Now, rarely is a gun that's stolen equal to $1,000. Now this makes that a misdemeanor. They have no leverage there to work with them, and I'm sure that takes the leverage out of the hand of the DAs. So that's the one question. How can we simply say that's acceptable? And secondly, while we've offered that all these supposed savings, which are going to be a while before any measurable savings is seen, who are any of these savings going to go to the victims? So now an auto burglary that's a misdemeanor that costs $700, $800, $900, who's going to be there to help that victim that we show up and have to deal with recover from that crime?
Thanks.
So I'll start, and then maybe Mr. Mashburn can follow up. The reality is this: most other states, in fact Oklahoma, in general property crimes has already increased the felony threshold to $1,000. If somebody steals or damages property valued under $1,000, I strongly believe that the perpetrator ought to have to pay back the victim. They ought to have to pay restitution. They ought to have to make that victim whole. They can't do that if they're sitting in jail or if they're sitting in prison for years. The taxpayers pay for their stay. So we need to make sure that the person makes it right and that restitution absolutely occurs for the victim. And this gives us an opportunity to do that. The other thing I would say is this, and thank you for what you do. These reforms are statutory, meaning that they can be amended, they can be tweaked, they can be modified, they can be improved upon through the standard legislative process. And we've also delayed the implementation for an entire year to give us an opportunity to do that, work with people just like yourself and others to make sure that we have policies in place that are actually going to accomplish their intent of reducing crime and increasing public safety, and that's what will happen.
District Attorney, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I mean, when should we just pass something and knowing we can fix it later? I mean, we don't want to do that. So, and then to answer your question, right now, concealing stolen property doesn't even have a limit on it. So we're going from 0 to 1,000 overnight. Auto burglaries become a misdemeanor under this. Somebody breaks into your car and takes your stuff, it's a misdemeanor now. So and then the restitution amount, if I've got a guy in front of me and I say, I'm just want to tell you guys how practically this works. So I got a misdemeanor guy. He broke into a bunch of cars. He broke into 20 cars one night, and he did $999 worth of stuff or damage in every one. That's a misdemeanor. So the most I can get out of that is a year, right? Now, I could stack them consecutively, but that practically never happens. So you're talking about a year. So in my county jails, they get 2.25 days for every day. So if I give somebody the maximum sentence of a year, they will serve 162 days. So, and I tell somebody, look, I'm going to give you, so to get any restitution out of them, I have to give them some sort of probation. So I'll have to give them 6 months in and 6 months out to work out and pay that restitution back. Well, they could say, no, I'm not paying restitution. Give me my whole year. I'll serve 162 days, and I won't owe anybody anything. So practically the way this works and the way the criminal mind works, you're not going to get, the victims are going to be left in the cold on this deal and not ever get any restitution.
Real quickly, how long has it been at $500? Do you know? How many years?
2001, we raised the limits.
Okay.
It was at 50, and we jumped from 50 to 500, I think, in 2001, and then so now we're going to 1,000.
Okay. There's a question in the back?
Okay. My question is kind of for the district attorney, but for both of you. How effective, because you mentioned that being able to charge as a felony gives you leverage. How effective has that leverage been in actually preventing recidivism?
In what?
With either the property crimes or with the drug crimes, how effective has the ability to bring the felony charge prevented recidivism?
Well, it's prevented. Let's see. I've got 160 people in drug court right now, all under the threat of felony convictions. I have almost 100 people in my community sentencing docket. I don't know how many people we've got in mental health court. Oklahoma County has 600 or 700 people in drug court right now, or maybe even 1,000. I'm not sure how. It's close to 1,000. I mean, so, and when you're talking about, especially in like the numbers, we have 10% of our population is in for drug possession. So you're talking about 2,700 people. So just between mine and David Prater's drug courts, we've almost captured that right there. So I mean that tells you a little bit about how many people we're diverting out. And as far as recidivism goes, Oklahoma is one of the lowest recidivism rates in the country. And the fact that our crime rates, so maybe we are doing something right, that our laws do have some sort of effect on people, that they're not as actively recidivist as other states. And the fact that we haven't seen our crime rates decrease, but we haven't seen them increase. When other states' crime's going up, ours isn't. So maybe we are doing something right there as well.
So, great question, and let me tell you, other states' crime rates are absolutely going down. In fact, the national average is that crime has dropped 20%. That's not the case in Oklahoma. A felony conviction does not reduce recidivism, it increases the likelihood of recidivism. And that's the irony of all ironies, because here's what happens. When I come out of prison as a convicted felon, I'm automatically excluded from most employment opportunities. That felony conviction acts as a scarlet letter, and it stays with me for life. So I can't find a job. I can't find stable housing because as a convicted felon, I'm automatically excluded from any assistance for housing. In today's society, most people won't even rent to a convicted felon. That puts me at greater risk for committing additional crimes. Statistically, I have enormous fees and fines that I have to pay back in conjunction with my sentence. I can't work. Don't really have any place to live, but I got to pay back the fees and fines. I'm still battling the core issue. All those factors together, I pick up antisocial behavior from being warehoused in a very hostile environment inside the prison walls. A felony conviction adds to our recidivism rates. It doesn't reduce it. And to Mr. Mashburn's point, he is right. In 2006, there was an audit that indicated that our recidivism rate, which stands at about 26% statewide, is relatively low compared to other states. But the entity that conducted the study that identified that said it's because you're incarcerating people who aren't criminals. You're incarcerating people that other states don't even incarcerate. They're not likely to reoffend. So of course you're going to have a lower recidivism rate. That's exactly what the research project indicated. A felony conviction does not reduce the likelihood that a person's going to not reoffend. It actually increases it.
Thank you. I had one question I want to get in, and that is, some critics or some supporters of the measures suggest that the real agenda of many counties, I want to say district attorneys, is money, is profit. The court fee, the fines, the fees, protecting their monthly payments for probation, whatever it is. I think even recently the speaker suggested that there's a profit-making motive at work. What's your response to that?
Wow, that comes from a total lack of understanding of how the criminal justice system works. I get no money when we send somebody to prison. If I wanted to profit off this deal, I just turn around, I tell my lawyers, give people probation. Every case gets probation, and just turn them loose every day, because then we can get 991 fees and we can get some other fees. I actually get more money by turning people loose on the street than I do by locking them up. So it absolutely profits me nothing to incarcerate anybody.
So I would just echo that. The reality is the legislature is not properly funding the criminal justice system in Oklahoma. We assign fees and fines to individuals who commit crimes, and those fees and fines are used to fund the criminal justice system in large part, and that's no way to do it. We need to adequately make sure that our district attorney's offices are funded, that our sheriff's departments are funded at the county level, that our police departments are funded at the municipal level, and we're not funding, the legislature is not funding our criminal justice system the way it should, and they rely too heavily on fees and fines for people who can't afford to pay them back, and it's just wrong.
Final question for you both. If each of you could take 30 seconds to a minute and tell us, the polls show this measure as ahead. If it passes, what do you think will happen in terms of sentencing, treatment, and reduction in imprisonment? Speaker?
Sure. So it's important to realize that we didn't get to have the highest incarceration rates overnight, and we're not going to get out of this dynamic overnight. This is a process. This is a discussion that has to continue to occur. But if these reforms pass, what will happen over the course of time is we will see greater investments in mental health care and substance abuse treatment at the local level. The paradigm will shift, and we will begin to see addiction as a disease, and we'll begin to treat it as such. And over the course of time, we will see a reduction in the number of felony convictions, a reduction in our prison population. We will see a healthier population, a healthier workforce. Families will be strengthened, and it'll be a new day in the state of Oklahoma.
District Attorney.
So what will happen if this passes is you will push all of our jail population to our county level. Our jails are already overcrowded. They'll continue to be overcrowded. What we'll have to do is give them even more good time credits, and it'll be a catch and release, catch and release. No treatment will occur because no one will choose to take any advantage of the treatment that is going to be there. There will be no real savings, because what we do is, if it's $50 a day in DOC, it'll be $50 a day now in county jail. There's no savings there, and what we're talking about, and so there's nothing left over for treatment. And what we'll do is catch and release. We'll allow people to continue their behavior, which will carry out into our roads, carry into our homes and our cars and our property, and we'll see. And I'll have to have those hard conversations with the victim's family that before I would have been able to stop him, but now I'm sorry I wasn't able to stop him before he hurt your family.
Please thank our guests for joining us.